Most people of Thedas are aware of the islands immediately to the north of our shores. Par Vollen, home to the dread Kunari, and Seheron, a land that has been in constant contention for many ages. Few are aware, however, that the Boeric Ocean to the north is littered with islands, some of which are quite substantial in size. Some provide haven for pirates, while others have colonies belonging to either the Kunari or the Tevinter Imperium, and which change hands as war between them rages on. But there are many reports of islands far beyond the reach of both nations. Welcome back to class, my dear students. In today's lecture of Dragon Age, the history and lore of Thedas, with me, Professor Abaslom, as always, we will end our little mini-series on the nations of Thedas with a look at the two largest islands of Thedas, Seheron and Par Vollen. While some would say that they could count as nations in and of themselves, others claim that these two floating landmasses are parts of other existing nations of Thedas. The potential authenticity of these latter claims is something we will explore in today's lesson, as well as learning about the history, culture, and geography of these two great islands. Without further ado, let us start off, as we usually do, with a bit of geography. In the farthest north of Thedas, in the Boeric Ocean, right at the edge of the map, lies the two large islands of Seheron and Par Vollen. Similar to the rest of this region of Thedas, both Seheron and Par Vollen are tropical islands, filled with lush and humid jungles and rainforests. Seheron is said to be the largest island in Thedas, though the size of Par Vollen seems to at least match it somewhat in comparison. The true size of Par Vollen is hard to gauge from the standard maps of the continent, but recently updated versions of Thedosian maps show a more complete view of the tropical island. Which one truly is the largest in the end is up for debate. Some depictions of Par Vollen portray frozen glaciers and blocks of ice surrounding parts of the island. If the north and south of the continent of Thedas corresponds to a respective north and south pole, then this is nothing out of the ordinary. But if the southern hemisphere theory, that we talked about in our very first lesson of this series, is correct, then there should not be any ice near Par Vollen, as this region of the planet corresponds to the equator. That, combined with the fact that the Kunari arrived to Par Vollen from somewhere beyond the waters of the island, raises the question of how there would be ice there. This could also come down to artistic liberties and inconsistencies, since we don't actually know a lot about Par Vollen as it is. The two islands are inhabited, with Par Vollen being the new homeland of the Kunari, as well as housing a native human population, while Seheron and the surrounding islands of the Boeric Ocean are home to native populations of humans and elves, as well as newer populations of Tevinter humans and Kunari. The reason for this mix we will get into shortly. The two larger settlements on Seheron is Alam and the capital bearing the same name as the island, Seheron. Additionally, there are several outposts and fortresses of various origin spread across the island, mostly of either Tevinter or Kunari origin. Examples of these are the old Tevinter fortress of Athvelanis, and the Kunari coastal fortress of Akaz. On Par Vollen, though many ancient and ruined human structures exist out in the jungles, the most important and maybe only larger city of the island is Kunandar, the capital of Par Vollen and the center of Kunari society in Thedas. Now we're going to switch it up a little bit and go through the history of these two islands before we go into cultural analysis, since there is a lot of context from the historical side that are needed to understand some of the more regional cultural aspects of these islands. So let's go back as far as we can, into the distant ancient age. Though there are speculations and theories suggesting some sort of interaction between the old Elven Empire and the native human populations of Seheron and Par Vollen, and that it is possible that the ancient elves also lived here before the arrival of humans, nothing conclusive can be drawn from these myths. Old legends and songs of Seheron that speak of great heroes who learned at the feet of elves, and the prehistoric structures of Par Vollen, whose complexity might be due to assistance from someone other than the human builders. More on these things later. The period slightly before and around -3100 Ancient is the era where we know for certain, from both archaeological and written sources, that these islands were inhabited by humans. Par Vollen boasted one of the oldest, if not the oldest, human civilization on Thedas. The native humans of Par Vollen built great pyramids and cities within the jungles of the island. The pyramids themselves are architectural marvels, built to mathematical perfection, which is an astounding achievement for such an early human civilization. We sadly know a lot less about the actual peoples of this culture than their pyramids, but what we do know is that this very special human civilization developed in isolation from the rest of the continent. And maybe, as mentioned earlier, it might have been the very first human civilization on Thedas, period. There are many theories and speculations regarding where the original humans came from and how they got to mainland Thedas. Scholars still to this day argue the different possibilities. One of the more plausible theories, in my own humble opinion, is that humans first migrated to mainland Thedas from the island of Par Vollen. The ancient human culture existing there, along with the fact that the old tales of the Dalish elves point to Par Vollen specifically as the place where humans first migrated from, strengthen this theory. There is a strong possibility that humans either originated as a species on the island of Par Vollen and then migrated to the rest of the continent around the 3rd millennia of the Ancient Age, or that humans first settled on Par Vollen after having migrated from somewhere unknown further north. A final interesting detail about Par Vollen is that there are supposedly, according to the Qunari mercenary and Ben Hasrath member Iron Bull, who grew up on the island, several old dwarven ruins spread across the island, along with the ancient human pyramids. Their architecture and possible age might be similar to that of the ancient lost Tig of Kalrapartha in the Hissing Wastes, dating back to before -495 Ancient. Presumably then settled by humans migrating from Par Vollen, much less is known about the ancient history of Seheron. Old tales talk of the griffins used by the Grey Wardens having originated from this island, though this is very hard to verify. We do know, however, that Seheron became one of the very first territories claimed by the nascent Tevinter Imperium in the years following its creation in -1195 Ancient. Indeed, the island is today dotted with old buildings, ruins, and other architectural creations that date back to the glory days of the old Imperium. Tevinter culture dominated Seheron and its native population from a very early point in history, and the Imperium, throughout its tumultuous existence, managed to be the undisputed masters of the island up until the Steel Age. It is during this particular age, however, that things take a drastic turn for these two islands, and all of northern Thedas, in fact. Because in the year 630 Steel, the Qunari arrived to the continent of Thedas. Due to their isolation from the rest of the mainland, and other factors that we will get into later, the native human population of Par Vollen were swiftly conquered by the arriving Kunari and successfully assimilated into the Qun without word reaching the rest of Thedas. 2 years later, in 632 Steel, the armies of the Qun came to Seheron, and with zeal and gunpowder, the Horned Giants not only managed to conquer the island that had been a part of the Imperium since its inception, but after 10 years of war, the Kunari had gained a sizable foothold into Winter's heartlands. This period, lasting until 784 Storm, is known as the New Exalted Marches, or the Kunari Wars, which saw the Kunari conquer much of northern Thedas, but eventually being pushed back by the combined efforts of both the nations of the Orlesian Chantry and Tevinter's Imperial Chantry. Relevant to Seheron specifically is that by 723, the Kunari were pushed back to the large island and entrenched themselves there. Tevinter tried to dislodge the Kunari with their navy, which led to the Battle of the Nosen Sea, to this date the largest naval engagement in recorded history. The battle ended in a stalemate. By the time that the Lomeran Accords were signed in 784 Storm between the rest of the continent's nations and the Qun, Tevinter decided to continue fighting the Kunari on their own, recapturing Seheron around this time while the Kunari retreated back to Par Vollen to rebuild. The people of Seheron did the same thing after so many years of war and turmoil. But Seheron, specifically, would sadly continue to be the battleground between the Imperium and the Qun for ages to come. In 855 Blessed, the Kunari launched a new offensive against Tevinter and the island, recapturing it in the span of 3 years. After much of the island's infrastructure were destroyed in this conflict, the Kunari now started to remold the island and its population in a manner befitting the Qun, converting the native population and asserting its authority over the island. Many sections of the island remained, and still to this day, remains outside of Kunari control, either controlled by Tevinter loyalists or, more importantly, resistance fighters of the native Seheron population. The native population, at this point, had come to hate both the Imperium and the Qun for the destruction that they had brought to their homeland, and the different flavors of oppression that both sides brought with them. Even though many among the native Seherons were eager to join the Qun and convert, especially former elven slaves, others have not been swayed by the priests of the Ben Hasrath. To this day, Seheron is a battleground between a multitude of warring factions, with seemingly no end in sight for the brutal bloodshed. More on Seheron later. With Par Vollen now having become the new home of the Kunari, one might wonder what happened to the old native human culture of the island as the Qun arrived on their shores. Today, this old culture is long gone and forgotten by the native humans of the island, who are at this point totally assimilated into the Qun and its society. One scholar that dives deeper into this fascinating topic is Renatus of Aisley, who in his work A Compiled History of the Occupied North, in the chapter named The Pyramids of Par Vollen, writes this, quote, "The island called Par Vollen was the first land in Thedas to be taken by the Kunari, and has been held by them ever since. But while the Kunari have raised their own marvels on the island, the famed city of Kunandar comes to mind, Par Vollen has a rich history before the Qun even came to its shores. Tear your eyes from Kunandar's wonders and look instead to the jungle. There you'll see the ruins of vast cities that proclaim in silence, 'We were here.' Par Vollen's distinctive pyramids, looming from the overgrowth, have remained largely intact, even if their intended purpose has been lost. They do not seem to be tombs, though some chambers contain bodies that have been carefully preserved, Amazingly, the pyramid's proportions are mathematically perfect. Since their alignment is so precise, one suspects they served some scientific purpose. Observatories, perhaps. Andvan Therastes have observed that the shape of the Par Vollen pyramids seems perfectly to match the constellation Solium. We know more of the pyramids than we do of the humans who built them. The Qunari came to Par Vollen as conquerors, but there is no history and little sign of battles fought on the island's shores. A civilization that could build such vast cities would surely have defenses, armies, perhaps weapons, alien even to the Qunari. So why is there so little proof of resistance? One answer may lie in what remains of their temples. Beneath the leaves and vines covering the walls, you can still make out the stylized carvings that adorned them. The paint has long since flaked away, but the silhouettes are clear. Intricate sea creatures, shipwrights, musicians, archers, and kings. Here and there, odd figures are depicted. Tall, horned, always in a position of authority and respect. What were these horned figures to the ancients of Par Vollen? Priests, ritualistically crowned? Heroes? Gods, perhaps? We may never know the truth. But when the Qunari arrived from the sea, horned and carrying the word of the Kun, perhaps instead of conquerors, the people of Par Vollen saw an old legend returning to them. This is all supposition. The humans of Par Vollen are Qunari now, their ancient civilization discarded like a child's toy. Yet the pyramids remain, along with the old cities, the island itself. One day, greater scholars may hear what they have to say." End quote. As mentioned, the native population of Seheron have suffered under the yoke of both the Imperium and the Kun, as the latter is currently holding control over most of the island. There is an active dislike towards these two occupying forces among the local populace. In the most extreme cases, this civil unrest have taken the form of various resistance fighters and rebel groups, who in one way or another seeks to fight the Kun and or the Imperium and free the island. The most famous, or infamous, depending on your side of the conflict, of these groups are the so-called Fog Warriors. Distinguishing themselves from other rebel forces on Seheron due to their experience, discipline, and lethal efficiency, the Fog Warriors use stealth strikes, ambushes, and guerrilla tactics to combat the island's occupiers. Shrouded in deep, unnatural fog, these rebels silently arrive at the place of ambush with their weapons and skin painted a pale white to more easily blend in with their surroundings, and strike swiftly and silently against their foes, often killing several combatants before the enemy has even realized that they are under attack. Hence the name Fog Warriors. The mysterious fog that shields these fighters is assumed to be conjured by some native type of mage, or created through alchemical means, but no one actually knows how the fog is created and where it comes from. Save for the Fog Warriors themselves, of course. Its secrets are well guarded. Each band of Fog Warriors have an individual known as a Fog Dancer with them, a sort of bard or storyteller, that regale the warriors with tales and legends from the island's past to boost their morale and fighting spirit. The Fog Warriors are, given the history of Seheron, fiercely independent and proud of their culture and heritage. This patriotism does not make these rebels careless or prone to violent excesses in wartime, however. In fact, both Ben Hasrath operatives and Tevinter sources speak of the Fog Warriors as having a clear moral and philosophical code, sparing civilians during ambushes and living by their strength and honor alone. A rare insight into the mindset and culture of the Fog Warriors, and of Seheron overall, can be found in the writings of one brother Ashur Vel, himself a native from Seheron, and, assumingly from his title of brother and his presence in lists of specifically Chantry-approved authors and their works, a member of the Chantry. In his book, A Land of Fog, section titled Battleground State, he writes this on the Fog Warriors and Seheron. Quote, "It seems a bitter twist of fate to discover that half of Thedas does not consider my homeland a nation at all. Qunari maps depict the island as part of their territory, without any ambiguousness to the claim. I can only assume this is because all islands within the Boeric Ocean naturally fall under their jurisdiction. The Tevinter maps, meanwhile, still proudly show the entire island as part of the Imperium, even though Imperial control outside of small pockets is little more than fiction, and changes whenever the Qunari return their attention to the area. Imperial reports speak of Fog Warriors, as if we are beasts, little better than darkspawn or dragons, dangerous elements of the wilderness, best avoided or eliminated, but ultimately of no consequence. It angers me to read these things. Ours is a land that has been shaped by war as no other. Long ago the Imperium came, and after centuries of trying and failing to turn us into compliant Imperial citizens, the Qunari came instead. They conquered Seheron and attempted to convert us. Neither side succeeded in taking our freedom. And though battle after bloody battle have ground our ancient halls of wisdom practically to dust, we still dream of the land that was. The fog dancers who travel with each band of warriors regale them with legends of old, and keep the songs of our people alive. They say that the griffins of the Grey Wardens came from Seheron. They tell us of the ancient curse of Nahar that brought the fog, and the promise that will one day lift it. They speak of the March of the Four Winds, of the lost people who fled to the northern islands, and the great heroes who learned at the feet of the elves. Are the old tales true? We may never know. All that remains of the land Seheron once was is gone. But I know we will make them true someday." End quote. This information not only speaks of the deep historical and cultural connection that not just the rebels of the island, but also the rest of the native population have to their past and heritage. It also speaks of numerous legends and tales, mentioned earlier, that seem to connect to mysterious aspects of the island and its ancient past. The Curse of Nahar seemed to be some sort of tale explaining the foggy nature and climate of the island, and maybe even its unnatural nature in regards to the Fog Warriors, and that the curse will one day be lifted after something has come to pass. The March of the Four Winds might be some sort of ancient migration to the island by the ancestors of the natives, preserved through oral storytelling as it has changed and mixed with fantastical aspects of stories and legends as the ages have passed. The great heroes who learned at the feet of the elves implies a connection to old elven civilization, maybe even predating the fall of Arlathan. But it should be said that this is just speculations and theory crafting on my part. As Brother Vel himself points out in the text, it is hard to know if there are any truth to the old stories at all, and that they might just be legends and fairy tales. They are enticing, however, and one can understand Brother Vel's hopes of making them true one day. Further studies into these topics would not only be interesting, but scientifically prudent as well. Moving on to Par Vollen once again. One of the most astounding and impressive places on the island is without a doubt the capital of not just the island, but of all of Qunari society, Kunandar. Most likely built when the Qunari first conquered the island and by this point outshining the old pyramids and cities of the native population, Kunandar has been described as a marvel of architecture by the few outsiders that have been allowed to visit this place, with great domes and aqueducts spread across the city. Kunandar has been said to easily rival the splendor and importance of other great Thedosian cities like Cumberland, Valroyo, and even Minrathous. The city's buildings and structures have been described as being shaped like beehives, reflecting the regimented uniformity that signifies the Qun. While many Thedosians might be negatively inclined towards the Qunari and their society due to historical reasons, Kunandar might be one of the few places in the world where one might actually understand how the society of the Qun might actually work in practice. This is at least what the famous seer of Kunandar thought when she wrote about the island and its capital. Quote, "The Qunari view their whole society as a single creature, a living entity whose health and well-being is the responsibility of all. Each individual is only a tiny part of the whole, a drop of blood in its veins, important not only for itself, but for what it is to the whole creature. Because of this, the Qunari most outsiders meet belong to the army, which the Qun regards as if it were the physical body, arms, legs, eyes, and ears, the thing a creature needs in order to interact with the world. One cannot get to know a person solely by studying his hands or his foot, and so one cannot truly meet the Qunari until one has visited their cities. That is where their minds and soul dwell." End quote. Much of the culinary culture on Seheron and Par Vollen is colored by the Qunari, since they are the dominant force in the area. From Qunari army rations and various stews involving fish heads and eels, to the more refined iskap, a dish with melon and powdered ginger, there is a great variation in Qunari cuisine. As for the more local foodstuffs and drinks of the two islands, one dish from Seheron that stands out is definitely Seheron fish pockets, smoked salmon and spices packed into bread pockets to give a great and flavorful meal. Furthermore, one of the hero Ferelden's companions, Sten, once remarked that Seheron smelled like tea, incense, and the sea. With this, we can possibly assume that tea is a popular drink and might even grow here and there on Seheron. Moving on to Par Vollen, one of the many exotic fruits that grow in the jungles of this island is bananas. And bananas from Par Vollen is especially known for their quality and flavor. On mainland Thedas, most bananas come from Ravane, but Par Vollen bananas are often preferred in baking, if one can get a hold of them. Lady Séverine Ledeur, author of the Whole Nug Culinary Treasures of Thedas, remarks about bananas from Par Vollen like this, when she first encountered the fruit and the creation of banana bread, or Raider Queen's bread of many tongues. Quote, "While the recipe does call for Par Vollen bananas, I find Ravani ones an acceptable substitute, despite what the recipe's creator claims. Most of us aren't mad enough to raid Qunari lands solely for the purpose of baking." End quote. And that will conclude not just this lesson, but also this lecture series and course in general. Now, we will return to the World of Thedas in the future and cover many more exciting topics, but that will have to be done during a future term. I hope that I have managed to conjure up the same excitement and interest that I have for this world in you as well during these lectures, and I would like to thank you all for attending and showing your interest in the world of Dragon Age. So, off you go. We will hopefully see each other in a future course, so until then, I have been Professor Abaslom, and I will see you all in the future. Take care. Thank you all for watching this video, and for having supported this channel during 2025 and into 2026. Even though I did not manage to produce as many videos as previous years since the Veilguard review took up much of my time, I am very satisfied with the end product, and I hope you are as well. In 2026, as I hinted at a little bit at the end of the Veilguard review, I might start to branch out into different topics to make lore videos about. Dragon Age is not going anywhere, however, and I have plans for the future on what we will tackle in regards to Thedas in the future as well. Once again, a huge thank you to all who have supported me throughout the years, and the new subscribers who have joined the channel during 2025. Like, subscribe, check out the Subscribe Star page if you like, and I hope that 2026 will be a good year for all of us. Until next time, have a good one.